Some cities fall in battle, some fade into dust, but a few, the rarest, are buried on purpose. Not because they were lost, but because someone wanted the world to forget they ever lived. In the pale light of a North African dawn, a man stands among the ruins of a vanished empire. Around him, the stones breathe heat from the sleeping desert, and the wind carries whispers from a city that should not exist. The year is 1858, and the man is Gustave Flaubert, the French novelist who once wrote of adultery and despair but now finds himself chasing ghosts. His boots grind through ancient dust on the hill of Bursa, where the city of Carthage once stood, and he feels something strange beneath his feet, not merely ruin, but remembrance. He came here searching for inspiration, but what he found was an absence so vast it felt alive. The Romans had claimed to destroy Carthage completely. They said they burned it, ploughed its ground with salt, and erased its name from every map. Yet, here, among the weeds and broken walls, the city whispers back. Every fragment of masonry feels like a defiance, every silence an accusation. What kind of empire fears a memory so much it tries to kill it twice, first in flame, then in history? Flaubert scribbles in his notebook as flies buzz over the sun-baked stones. The sea stretches beyond the ruins like a sheet of hammered glass. The world around him hums with continuity. A camel turns a well. Children play in the fields. Fishermen mend their nets on the shore, all beneath the ruins of what Rome once called its greatest enemy. He realizes then that Carthage is not dead. It breathes through these ordinary moments, half visible, half forgotten, lingering between myth and dust. Centuries before Flaubert's journey, Rome had declared that Carthage must not only be conquered, it must be forgotten. Carthago delenda est, said the Roman senator Cato. Carthage must be destroyed, he repeated the phrase, so obsessively that it became an incantation, the mantra of an empire terrified of a rival's shadow. When the Roman legions finally tore through the city walls in 146 BCE, they did more than burn a city. They performed an act of historical murder. They killed its libraries, its language, its gods. They destroyed not only what Carthage was, but what it could be remembered as. And yet memory is a stubborn thing. Like a spark buried in ash, it waits for breath. When Flaubert walks through the ruins, he becomes that breath. Each note he takes is an act of rebellion against Rome's silence. He writes of broken harbours buried in earth, of marble steps leading to nowhere, of mosaics that still shimmer faintly beneath the soil. All Carthage now stretches out before me, he writes. But what he's really looking at is not just an ancient city, it's an idea. That the past, no matter how deeply buried, can still rise and speak through the cracks of time. Carthage was once called Carthage, the new city. It rose from the sea like a second Tyre, a jewel of Phoenician cunning. Its ships ruled the waves, its merchants ruled trade, and its gods Baal-Hamon, Tanit, Melkart, watched from burning altars as its empire spread across the Mediterranean. But what made Carthage dangerous was not merely its power, it was its difference. Where Rome worshipped conquest, Carthage worshipped balance between sea and desert, God and man, commerce and faith. That difference, to Rome, was intolerable. So Rome decided to rewrite the world. And in rewriting it, they erased their rival's name. They told themselves Carthage was barbaric, a nest of child sacrificers, traders, and cheats. The Romans painted their enemy as a monster so that their own cruelty might look like justice. Yet even as they destroyed its walls, they could not stop using its words, its trade routes, its gods disguised beneath Latin names. Rome was haunted by the very civilization it had, obliterated. Carthage had become the empire's mirror, and Rome could not bear to see itself reflected there. As Flaubert walks through the crumbled temples and hollow cisterns, he can almost hear the echoes of those lies, the propaganda that survived where the city did not. He realizes that history is written by the victors. What survives of Carthage is not its architecture or its books, but its absence. Its silence presses against every page of Roman history like a ghost's hand on the parchment. In the ruins, he imagines the last night. The fires rising from the harbour, the screams echoing through the narrow streets, the smell of burning cedar and flesh. Women clutching their children, soldiers fighting in doorways, priests calling to gods who would not answer. The Roman legions, methodical and pitiless, moving from house to house until only smoke and silence remained. For 6 days, the city burned. And yet, Somehow, it endured, because memory doesn't live in the stones. It lives in the stories told after the stones fall. Flaubert would later turn these ghosts into art. His novel Salammbô would resurrect Carthage not as ruins, but as myth, a dream of silk and blood, incense and iron. He would give voice to the voiceless, and in doing so, revive the city Rome had tried to erase. Art became archaeology of the soul. Through him, the ashes spoke again. But beneath the beauty of his words, the deeper truth remains. Carthage survived because it lived in the mind of its enemy. Rome tried to erase it, but in doing so, immortalized it. The phrase Carthago delenda est, repeated across centuries, became a curse against Rome itself, a reminder of the cruelty hidden beneath civilization's marble veneer. Every time Rome remembered its own triumph, it was forced to remember what it had destroyed. Flaubert's journey ends at sunset. He stands on the same hill where Dido once gazed across the sea, where Hannibal once dreamed of revenge, where Rome once salted the earth. The city is gone, but its echo remains in Latin poetry, in colonial ruins, in the eternal human refusal to be forgotten. The silence feels sacred. Somewhere beneath his feet, the bones of 1,000,000 lives still whisper, "We were here." Carthage is more than a ruin. It is the memory of what memory itself can endure. It reminds us that no empire, no matter how vast, can bury the human voice forever. The Romans built monuments of stone. Carthage became a monument of absence. One you can still hear, if you listen closely, when the wind moves across the red dust of Tunisia. And so, as Flaubert closes his notebook, he looks out at the horizon toward the blue edge of the world, where Carthage once ruled the waves. He cannot yet know that this journey will give birth to a story, and that story will give birth to remembrance. What Rome burned, he will make eternal. For the past cannot be erased. It can only be rewritten, and Carthage, the city Rome tried to erase, will rise again not in stone, but in story. Before it was a ruin, before it was a warning, Carthage was a miracle. Rising from the African coast like a vision of light and stone, it was the child of Tyre, the new city, Carthage, a place built by survivors, traders, and dreamers who sailed westward from the lands of the Phoenicians, carrying with them their gods, their language, and the colour of kings, the deep crimson of Tyrian purple. From a handful of exiles came an empire that would one day rival Rome itself. The Phoenicians had always been wanderers, seafarers who measured the world not by its borders, but by its horizons. In the 8th century BCE, when the bronze of their ships caught the dawn light, they left the crowded shores of Lebanon and sailed toward the edge of the known world. They built colonies across the Mediterranean, like beads on a string: Cyprus, Sardinia, Malta, Spain, until one of their ships found the perfect harbour on the North African coast. There, at the curve of a blue bay where the land met the desert, they founded their new city. It began as a scattering of huts on the hill of Bursa, surrounded by orchards and salt lagoons, but its founders had ambition in their blood. Their legend tells of a princess named Elissa Dido to the Romans who fled from Tyre after her brother murdered her husband. With her companions, she reached this shore and bargained for a plot of land no larger than an ox hide. But Dido was clever. She cut the hide into thin strips and encircled the entire hill, claiming far more than the local king had intended. That was the beginning of Carthage, a city born from wit, bound to the sea, and destined for greatness. The harbour was its heart. It shimmered in the sun, shaped with precision that seemed almost divine, a great circular military dock hidden behind a rectangular commercial port. From above, it resembled an eye staring out toward the horizon, forever watching the sea. Within its concentric walls lay hundreds of ships, war galleys, merchant vessels, triremes, and barges laden with goods from every corner of the world. Above each dock, carved into the limestone, stood columns and arches that framed the proud prows of their ships. At the centre, on a raised island, the Admiral's Tower rose like a crown, a vantage from which every vessel could be commanded. It was an engineering marvel, centuries ahead of its time. The Kothon of Carthage became the beating heart of an empire, built not by conquest, but by connection. Carthage traded everything: silver from Spain, tin from Britain, gold from Africa, and purple dye from Tyre. Its merchants spoke dozens of tongues: Greek, Egyptian, Numidian, Libyan, blending words into a new language of commerce. They brought elephants from the interior, ivory, salt, and slaves. But more than any commodity, they traded ideas. The Phoenicians had invented the alphabet centuries earlier, And through Carthage, that alphabet spread the ancestor of every letter you're reading now. In this way, the city that would one day be silenced had already taught the world how to speak. The streets of Carthage were alive with sound, the creak of ox carts, the clatter of bronze tools, the hum of markets filled with citrus, linen, and incense. Children learned their letters beneath the shade of olive trees. Priests offered sacrifices to Tanit, the goddess of the moon and fertility, and to Baal Hammon, the fiery god of life and time. On festival days, processions wound through the streets bearing statues of these gods crowned with flowers, their faces streaked with ash and gold. To their followers, the gods were not distant. They walked among the living in the waves, in the fire, in the heartbeat of the city. Carthage was not a kingdom, but a republic, a city governed by its richest citizens, its shophitim, and by councils that balanced power like weights on a scale. Aristotle himself praised its stability, comparing it to the disciplined order of Sparta. Wealth, not birth, was the key to influence. In this, Carthage was more modern than any of its rivals, a place where merchants, not monarchs, ruled the world. Yet, beneath this wealth and brilliance, the city held contradictions. It worshipped life, but feared time. It pursued peace, but prepared for war. Its citizens rarely fought themselves, hiring mercenaries from distant lands to do their killing: Iberians, Celts, Numidians, Greeks. Carthage's sons built ships, not swords. Its soldiers were bought, not born. Still, the city prospered. By the 5th century BCE, Carthage had become one of the largest cities on Earth. From the hill of Bursa, the view stretched across gardens and farms irrigated by countless canals, all the way to the glittering sea. Its hinterlands produced grain, wine, and oil enough to feed half the Mediterranean. Its artisans created jewelry from gold and glass. Its scholars studied the stars and the winds. Its navy dominated every coast it touched. But Carthage's destiny, like all empires, was bound to its neighbours. To the east lay Egypt and Greece. To the north, the new city of Rome. At first, the two republics treated each other as distant partners. Carthage allowed Roman merchants to sail within its waters. Rome stayed clear of Africa. For centuries, they coexisted, two powers bound by treaties and mutual convenience. Yet peace, built on equality, cannot last when ambition stirs. Rome grew, and as it grew, it began to crave the sea that Carthage already commanded. It built ships modelled on Carthaginian designs, copied its trade systems, adopted its gods under new names. But imitation breeds envy, and envy breeds fear. Rome began to look south and see not an ally, but a mirror, a reflection of what it wanted to be and what it could never admit it had borrowed. Carthage, too, was changing. As it expanded into Spain and Sicily, its wealth deepened, but so did its distance from the old ideals of Tyre. Its merchants became kings in all but name. Its councils grew more corrupt. The same drive that had once made Carthage brilliant now made it vulnerable not to outsiders, but to its own hunger for control. And yet, even at its height, there was something fragile in Carthage's grandeur. It was a city without a voice in its own story. The Greeks wrote of it as exotic, the Romans as monstrous, but Carthage wrote nothing that survived. Its language, Punic, would one day be spoken only in echoes on coins, in inscriptions, in the mouths of its enemies. The city that taught the world to write would leave no words of its own behind. Still, it endured for a time as a beacon of beauty and power. Its ships ruled the sea lanes from Gibraltar to the Levant. Its explorers, like Hanno the Navigator, sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, down the coast of Africa, into waters no European would see again for 2,000 years. They spoke of volcanoes that vomited fire into the sky, of jungles where hairy women fought with teeth and claws, perhaps the first description of gorillas in recorded history. The world was vast, and Carthage's reach seemed endless. But far across the water, Rome was watching. The two republics could not coexist forever. One ruled the land, the other the sea. And the sea was the blood of the ancient world. In the shimmering heat of the North African sun, Carthage stood radiant, but shadows were already gathering beyond the horizon. The treaties with Rome were beginning to fray. Sicily, the jewel of the Mediterranean, was becoming a prize both coveted and contested. Soon, the merchants of Carthage would find themselves facing legions rather than traders, and their harbours would echo not with song but with the drumbeat of war. The world was about to choose between two mirrors of civilization, and only one would be allowed to endure. The first spark of war was small, a quarrel on the island of Sicily, a dispute over a city neither Rome nor Carthage had built. But from that spark rose an inferno that would consume the ancient world. For more than a century, two great republics, one born of the land, the other of the sea, clashed for the right to define civilization itself. It was not merely a contest of armies, but of memory. When it ended, only one version of history would be allowed to survive. In 264 BCE, the First Punic War began. To Rome, the sea was unfamiliar, treacherous, and alien the domain of Carthage's power. But Rome learned quickly. Capturing a wrecked Carthaginian vessel, Roman engineers reverse-engineered its design, copying the double rows of oars and the bronze-beaked prow. Soon, a fleet of Roman warships darkened the horizon. Clumsy but numerous, Carthage laughed until Rome invented something new, the Corvus, a great boarding bridge that turned sea battles into land battles, where Roman discipline reigned supreme. The tides began to shift. For 23 years, the two empires bled each other dry. Carthage, rich in trade but poor in soldiers, relied on mercenaries, Iberians, Gauls, Numidians, fighters who bled for coin, not for country. Rome's soldiers, bound by duty and ambition, fought for the promise of land and glory. The difference was fatal. When the war finally ended in 241 BCE, Carthage was forced to surrender Sicily, its richest grain source, and pay a crippling indemnity. Rome celebrated, Carthage seethed. The peace that followed was uneasy, brittle as pottery. Carthage turned inward, rebuilding its fortunes through trade in Spain. There, a general named Hamilcar Barca saw a future beyond Roman reach. He was a soldier of brilliance and bitterness, and he carried with him a single conviction, that Rome could never be trusted and never forgiven. As his young son followed him through the Spanish hills, Hamilcar made him swear an oath before the gods to hate Rome forever. The boy's name was Hannibal. 2 decades later, he would bring the world to the edge of apocalypse. Hannibal Barca was not a man of half measures. When Rome violated Carthaginian agreements in Spain, he struck not from the sea, but from the mountains. His army crossed the Pyrenees, the Rhone, and then, impossibly, the Alps. Through snow and stone, through freezing winds and falling rock, his men dragged their elephants up the cliffs, like phantoms of Africa invading the sky. When they emerged into the valleys of Italy, frostbitten but unbroken, Rome trembled. No foreign army had entered their homeland in centuries. Hannibal had done the unthinkable. He had brought the war to Rome's doorstep. What followed was a masterpiece of destruction. At Trebia, Hannibal's cavalry crushed the Roman legions in the icy river. At Lake Trasimene, his ambush annihilated an entire army in a single morning so sudden that the survivors drowned in their armour. And then came Cannae, a slaughter so complete that it haunted Roman memory for generations. Nearly 50,000 Roman soldiers lay dead on the field, their bodies piled like harvest sheaves. The sun set on a sea of crimson. In that moment, Rome wavered. Its allies defected, its senators despaired, its citizens whispered that perhaps the gods had turned against them. But Hannibal, for all his genius, carried one fatal flaw he could destroy, but not replace. He shattered Rome's armies, but not its will. The city that had risen from wolves and blood refused to kneel. For 15 years, Hannibal ravaged Italy, undefeated but stranded, while Rome learned his every move. Slowly, the Republic adapted, cutting his supply lines, retaking its allies, striking at his homeland. A young Roman general named Scipio, later called Africanus, turned Hannibal's own strategy against him. He sailed to Africa, forcing the great Carthaginian commander to abandon Italy and return to defend his city. At Zama, the two armies met the sons of Rome and the son of Carthage. Hannibal's elephants charged, but Rome had learned. Trumpets blared, and the animals panicked, trampling their own men. When the dust cleared, Carthage's might was broken. Hannibal fled into exile, hunted across the Mediterranean until, cornered and betrayed, he took his own life with poison. Rome celebrated as if the world itself had been conquered. But beneath the triumphal arches and laurel crowns, fear still lingered. Carthage lived wounded, diminished, but alive. Its harbours filled again with ships. Its merchants grew rich once more. To Rome, this rebirth was intolerable. A rival once destroyed should not rise again. Cato the Elder saw it clearly. Every speech he gave, no matter the topic, ended with the same refrain: Carthago delenda, est, Carthage must be destroyed. It became a national obsession, a ritual curse, repeated in the Senate until it became prophecy. And in 149 BCE, that prophecy was fulfilled. Rome declared its final war. This time, it was not about trade or territory. It was about annihilation. The Roman legions landed in Africa, demanding Carthage dismantle its own defences and surrender its weapons. When the citizens refused, Rome laid siege to the city. For 3 long years, Carthage fought like a cornered lion. Its walls, triple-layered and 30 feet high, defied every assault. Men, women, and children worked side by side, forging weapons from kitchen metal, using clay roofs as sling stones. When food ran out, they ate leather, then rats, then the dead. Their priests prayed to Baal Hammon for deliverance. Their soldiers fought with a fury that terrified even their conquerors. But Rome was relentless. Scipio Aemilianus, grandson of the man who had defeated Hannibal, tightened the noose. When the walls finally fell in 146 BCE, the legions poured through the gates, slaughtering all who stood in their path. The city burned for 17 days, a column of fire visible across the sea. Those who survived were sold into slavery. The rest became ash. Then came the final act, the one that made Carthage not only dead, but forgotten. The Romans razed the ruins, ploughed the soil, and, according to legend, sowed it with salt, so that nothing could ever grow there again. It was not just vengeance, it was memory warfare. Rome was rewriting the world, ensuring that even the earth itself would deny that Carthage had ever existed. And so began the second death, the Erasure. Rome's historians, poets, and philosophers remade Carthage into a monster, a foil to justify their empire's virtue. They spoke of child sacrifices and greed, of a city too wealthy, too foreign, too proud. Carthage became a ghost painted in the colours of fear. Its real voices, its merchants, mothers, and sailors were gone, replaced by the words of its conquerors. History became propaganda. But even as Rome celebrated its victory, Scipio Aemilianus wept. As he watched the city burn, he whispered a line from Homer: "A day will come when sacred Troy shall perish, and so shall all." He understood the truth that what Rome had done to Carthage, time would one day do to Rome. The salt Rome scattered did not stop the seeds of memory. They waited in the dust, silent but alive, until centuries later, travellers like Flaubert would come searching for what remained. The empire that sought to erase had, unknowingly, immortalized what it feared most. Because even ruin remembers, even silence speaks. And beyond the ashes of Carthage, the wind still carries a whisper not of defeat, but of endurance. A whisper that says, you cannot kill a city that lives in the minds of those who destroyed it. But the story does not end in smoke. For what Rome buried beneath the soil of Africa would not stay buried forever. Something was stirring again in myth, in memory, in the very stones Rome had cursed. For 2,000 years, Carthage lay buried beneath layers of dust, legend, and deliberate forgetting. Rome had burned the city, enslaved its people, and salted its soil, yet still, the ground remembered. Beneath the modern streets of Tunis, beneath whitewashed houses and olive groves, the bones of an empire waited to be unearthed. The salt did not kill Carthage, it only preserved its ghost. When the smoke of its destruction faded, the site became a scar. The Romans built their own colony over the ruins, as if to claim the silence they had created. Temples to Jupiter rose where shrines to Tanit had stood. Statues of Roman emperors gazed coldly over the same harbours where Phoenician ships had once glided out to sea. The new city was called Colonia Julia Carthago, and in time it became one of the jewels of the Roman Empire. But beneath every Roman stone, Carthaginian earth still breathed. The irony was cruel. Rome's victory became Carthage's resurrection. The conqueror could not help but rebuild what it had erased. The roads, aqueducts, and baths of Roman Carthage followed the same contours as the old city. Its harbour, once destroyed, was dredged and reopened. The Kothon, that circular masterpiece of engineering, returned to life under another flag. Without realising it, Rome had ensured Carthage would never truly vanish. And with every new empire that followed, the ghost stirred. When the legions fell silent, when the marble cracked, and Rome's own monuments turned to ruin, Carthage still stood, a shape in the sand. The Vandals came in the 5th century, a Germanic tribe from the north, swept by the winds of chaos that carried them across the Mediterranean. They made Carthage their capital. For a century, it was again a city of ships, merchants, and gold. The name that Rome had tried to erase appeared once more on the maps of the world. But history is merciless in its repetition. The Vandals, too, fell to conquest this time by the Byzantine Empire, Rome's eastern heir. The Emperor Justinian sent his general, Belisarius, to reclaim the lost lands of Africa. When his armies marched through the gates of Carthage in 533 CE, they found a city still thriving, still echoing with the hum of trade. The Byzantines restored the baths, rebuilt the basilicas, and made Carthage a centre of their African dominion. Yet even that empire was not eternal. In the 7th century, Arab armies swept across North Africa like a tide. They came not to rebuild Rome's world, but to replace it. Carthage resisted, its Byzantine defenders holding the walls as flames rose again from the harbour. For the second time in history, the city was razed to the ground, not by salt and law, but by fire and faith. The Arabs abandoned the smoking ruins and built anew on a nearby hill. The new city would be called Tunis. For centuries, the ruins of Carthage slumbered beneath its younger sibling. Stones pillaged for mosques and palaces, marble columns buried in the courtyards of homes. Travellers passed by the site and saw nothing but low mounds and scattered fragments. Yet the silence was deceptive. For Carthage had already become something greater than a city. It was now a story, a warning, a dream. In medieval Europe, scholars read Virgil's Aeneid and wept for Dido, the queen who built a city of exile only to lose it to love and war. The Romans had turned her into tragedy, but in her sorrow, she became immortal. Her death, her pyre burning over the sea, became the poetic memory of Carthage itself, a civilization that chose death over submission. To the poets and priests of Christendom, Carthage was a symbol of pride destroyed. But to others, to the dreamers, the exiles, the colonized, it was something different, proof that even in defeat, memory could defy empire. And so, the city Rome, tried to erase, kept living in the imagination of those who came after. Centuries later, during the height of European colonialism, the French returned to North Africa. They came with archaeologists and soldiers, priests and poets. In 1858, a weary writer named Gustave Flaubert stepped off a ship and felt the heat of the African wind on his face. He had come chasing ghosts, the same ghosts that Rome had buried and history had tried to silence. In the fields of La Masa, he found them. Carthage revealed itself in fragments, the curve of a cistern, the marble foot of a forgotten statue, the ghostly outline of its harbours visible from the hills. Flaubert saw in those ruins not just the remains of a city, but the persistence of the human spirit. He wrote Salammbô, a novel that turned archaeology into myth, giving voice to a civilization that had none left to speak for it. Through him, Carthage rose once more, a city of colour, fire, and forbidden devotion. And yet, this rebirth carried its own irony. For the French, like the Romans before them, used Carthage to mirror their own ambitions. They saw in it both a warning and a reflection, a civilization that had ruled the seas, grown rich, and fallen to hubris. Colonial officers walked among the ruins and imagined themselves as heirs to Rome's empire, not realizing they were walking on the bones of an older warning. But Carthage endures precisely because it resists ownership. Every empire that claims it becomes part of its story and part of its warning. When Tunisia gained its independence in the 20th century, Carthage was no longer a symbol of defeat, but of endurance. Tunisian archaeologists began unearthing the ancient harbour, revealing the intricate docks that had once held hundreds of ships. The hill of Bursa, once salted and cursed, became a museum. Statues of Tanit returned to the light. The salt had failed. The city had survived. Today, when the sun sets over the Bay of Tunis, the light turns the water bronze, and the outlines of ancient Carthage shimmer just beneath the surface. The ghosts of the Kothon, that great circular harbour, still shape the land. Tourists walk where merchants once bargained, children play in streets that once echoed with Punic prayers, and every whisper of wind over the ruins carries a reminder that nothing, not even empire, lasts forever. The greatest power of Carthage is not what it built, but what it became after destruction, a lesson in how memory survives annihilation. Rome's victory was absolute, yet Rome's own ruins now stand beside Carthage's. Their stones face one another across time, equal in decay, equal in silence. But perhaps the truest victory belongs to neither empire. It belongs to the idea that human stories cannot be erased. They survive in myth, in art, in the shifting soil that remembers what we try to forget. They survive in the voices of those who walk the ruins and ask, who were they? And in that question, Carthage lives again. Because in the end, erasure is never perfect. The soil remembers, the sea remembers, and so do we. The city that was meant to vanish became eternal not in power, not in stone, but in the persistence of remembrance. For even if Rome erased its name, Carthage remains written in us in every story of the conquered, in every ruin that refuses to stay silent, in every civilization that rises from the ashes of another. But the story does not rest here. For in the modern world, where memory can be rewritten at the touch of a screen, Carthage whispers a question across the centuries, a question that still demands an answer. If history belongs to the victors, who remembers the lost? This is the haunting story of Carthage, an empire born from exile, raised by trade, and silenced by conquest. From its Phoenician roots to its fiery destruction, Carthage's tale is one of resilience against oblivion. Rome sought to annihilate it, not only to conquer its lands, but to erase its very name from human memory. Yet centuries later, the city rose again, in poetry, in ruins, and in the hearts of those who refused to forget. Through the dust of Tunisia and the words of Flaubert, we uncover the paradox of Carthage, a civilization destroyed to be remembered, a ghost that outlived its conqueror. This is not just the story of a fallen city, it is the story of how memory endures, even when history tries to bury it. If this journey through the ashes of Carthage moved you, if the echoes of forgotten empires stir something within you, then don't let the story end here. Like this video to help more people discover the forgotten voices of history. Subscribe to join our growing community of time travelers, storytellers, and seekers of the past. Every click, every comment keeps these lost worlds alive. Tell us in the comments, which forgotten civilization should we bring back next? Should we wander the marble ruins of Byzantium, trace the lost libraries of Alexandria, or uncover the vanished kingdoms of the Sahara? Your suggestions shape the stories we tell, and together, we keep history from being erased, because memory is rebellion. And as long as we remember, nothing, not even Carthage, is ever truly lost.